Hello everybody, so in this video we're going to try to build an environment inspired by Play Dead's Inside. Of course, you have seen similar aesthetics in many other games and you can use this look and feel for many other genres. So this is not really limited to some low poly mysterious horror game like Inside. So I'm going to provide the assets and scripts I've used in this scene in my Patreon. First of all, we have this set of low poly environmental assets I've made with Misty AI. And I have this character and its animations from Mixamo. I have made modifications to the animations, so make sure you download this from my Patreon. And this very nice truck you can download from the original link I provide in the description. And I'm gonna provide the entire scene as well. So this is a URP project, Universal Render Pipeline. It's also optional to install Cinemachine package, although not really necessary because this video is about environment and not the camera. Another thing we don't need to cover in this video is how the character controller works, although we can totally do that in future videos. Okay, so let's get started and create a new scene. I'm gonna right click, create an empty scene. I'm gonna call it new tutorial. So for starters, we're gonna create a terrain. I'm gonna right click 3D object and create a terrain. I'm gonna reduce the size of it. The 1000 width and length is too much, so I'm gonna reduce it to 300 like so. And also I usually like to reposition my terrain so that the center of my terrain is the center of the world. And another thing I usually do with my terrain is to set the height, set the initial height to something more than 0. So I'm gonna say, set it to 50. I'm gonna do it like so. So next I'm gonna move the camera to the center of the view, like so. I'm gonna click on the camera and game object, align with view. The next thing I do is drag and drop the player prefab from Xspot folder, prefabs, and I'm gonna drag and drop it right over here. So in this prefab, the player input is already set up. I've set it to project-wide input system actions, although you can change it. And the only thing important in this is the move action, at least for this tutorial. We're gonna need a move action and assign the event to character on input move function, like so. We don't need to get into too much detail for that. We can discuss that in detail in future videos, because this character also has an animation controller which has its own setup and can really take its own video to discuss in details. So if I press play, I should be able to move the character. So one more thing I'm gonna do is assign the camera so it follows the character. So to do that, I'm gonna right click and create a Cinemachine follow camera. So what it does is it creates a Cinemachine camera and assign a Cinemachine brain to my main camera. So the next thing I'm gonna need to do is just drag and drop the Xbox character onto the tracking target, like so. So now if I hit play, the camera is expected to follow the character. So it does follow the character, except we need to set up the offsets, like so. And since the save during play is enabled, when I get out of play mode, this mode will show up and I can keep my changes. So after setting up the basics, we're gonna start working with the terrain itself. So I'm gonna click on the terrain and go to paint terrain mode. I'm gonna select raise or lower terrain. And right over here, I'm gonna try to make it this sort of uneven surface. So how do I do that? I'm gonna reduce the opacity. So the opacity is still too much. I'm gonna reduce it to say half. And this gives me a more controllable brush. So the way I do it is that the further I go, the higher I bring up the terrain. I'm gonna increase the brush size like so. And if I click on the player prefab, you can see this blue line. So this is the path the character can take. So I'm gonna try to take that as a reference. I'm really trying to not overdo it because it can easily make the scene ugly. So I can already feel like there's too much height in front of the character, but that's not a problem because I can bring the character a little bit backward and we're good to go now. So I'm gonna select another brush to make this part of the scene a little bit uneven as well. I'm gonna also increase the height of this part of the terrain just a little bit. So we're good to go for now. We definitely make it better as we move on. So next I'm gonna try adding trees. I'm gonna select the terrain and go to paint trees mode, edit trees, and I have a set of prefabs right over here in environment folder, and you can use any of these trees. I'm gonna pick tree number 1 like so and add it to my trees. So with the tree 1 selected, if I drag the mouse like so, my trees get drawn. So you need to pay attention that if you have a very high density on trees, it's gonna go like so. Very high density can make really dense set of trees. You can also work with the tree height parameter right over here. So if I increase the tree height, it's gonna make very tall trees. If I reduce it, I'm gonna get smaller ones. So I'm gonna reduce the density, I'm gonna reduce the height, and like so. I would rather increase the height a little bit, like so. So I'm gonna increase the height again and fill the background with taller trees. So this is good enough for starters. Next, we're gonna add some grass to the scene. So I'm gonna go to paint details mode, edit details, and add grass texture. So in the same folder, I have this grass 1 texture. I would really recommend to add more textures, although you don't need a million textures. Maybe 5 variants can give you enough variation to avoid making things look similar throughout the scene. So I'm gonna drag and drop this grass 1, and for both healthy and dry color, I'm gonna try to select a color really dark and desaturated. It's very important what color you pick depending on your environment. So I'm trying to work with colors around this side of the color wheel, like this kind of dark blue and black part of the color wheel. So I'm gonna select this and use the same one. Just gonna copy and paste it on the dry color as well. So I'm gonna leave the detail density as it is because we're gonna change it, so we're gonna see how it affects the scene. Now, if I drag my brush on the scene, on the terrain, you're gonna see the grasses show up like so. But the density seems very low, so I'm gonna increase it. As I increase the density, we start to see more of the grass, like so. So we can always play around with the density and the sizes as we go forward. This is a very intuitive process, so you don't need to worry about getting things perfect on the first try. So I'm gonna add another one, except this time I'm gonna increase the minimum width and height of the grass. I'm still gonna use the same colors. So now I'm gonna select it, and this time I'm getting larger set of grasses. So I'm gonna increase the density a little bit, like so. And I'm gonna use it to fill out the far side of the scene. You can also use it for the part closer to the camera. So if I hit play, I feel like the color of the grasses are still a little bit light, but we're gonna play around with the color and density as we move on. So next we're gonna try to play with the fog. So I'm gonna open up the lighting tab. If you don't see this tab, say I close it, and you can make it visible again by clicking Window, Rendering, and Lighting right over here. So it creates the lighting modal, and I can drag and drop it right over here. And if I select the environment and enable the fog and increase the density, you can see the fog look like this. I'm gonna change the color. Again, I'm gonna make it dark, really close to this dark blue I have right over here. I'm gonna try to increase the density again. And next, I'm gonna remove the directional light and select the main camera and set the background type to solid color and select the darkest side of the darkest part of my view as the background color of the camera. You can see the results in the game view. So what happens if I increase the density? You can see the scene goes in total black. We don't want that. So I'm gonna keep it around about this value. Next, I'm gonna just drag and drop this darker material on the ground. This isn't how you actually work with the terrain. On bigger scenes, you have to select the paint texture mode, like so, add terrain layers with different colors and textures, and you can paint on the terrain with different colors. But since we're good with one solid color for the ground, at least for this small scene, we're good to go with this solid color directly assigned to the terrain. So the next thing we're gonna need is to work with the lighting of the environment. So let's see how that works. So there are several assets we need to work with when it comes to lighting. First, I'm gonna create a couple of point lights. I'm gonna duplicate them along the path, like so. So if I go to game view and increase the intensity, you can see this tiny bit of shining on the environment. So the fact that it's a night scene, that does not mean we're gonna work in a pitch black environment. So you still need light sources to manage how things look in the environment. So that's how we do it with basic point lights. So next, I'm gonna click on the camera and enable the post-processing effect. So by default, you can see effects you don't necessarily want. So I'm gonna right-click on the hierarchy and select a global volume, like so. Create a new profile for it. Okay, so I'm gonna add the depth of field to this volume. I'm gonna enable it and use bouquet, enable focus distance and focal length. So I'm gonna play around with the values and try to get the effect I want. So the only thing I want is the foreground to have this blurry effect, not the middle ground and the far side of the scene. So it looks like that is good enough. So next, I'm gonna try adding the truck to the scene. The truck will have a light source attached to it, which give a very interesting look to the scene. So let's see how that works. So for the truck, I'm gonna move to this folder and drag and drop the truck right over here, right in front of the camera. So right over here, I have this material. The way you make it is you right click, create a material and call it the headlights material. And what I do with this is enable emission, make it totally white and increase the intensity to 10. So now when I drag and drop it on the light, this is the kind of effect I get from the headlights of the vehicle. Next, I'm going to right click and add light sources. I'm going to add 2 point lights, like so. I'm going to bring it close to the headlights. I'm going to duplicate and put another one right over here. And I'm also going to create a spotlight, like so. And gonna put it right over here. So with the spotlight selected, I'm gonna click on game object, align with view, like so. I'm gonna bring it a tiny bit forward. I'm also gonna duplicate this one and put it right over here. And one final thing, I'm gonna click both of the spotlights and enable the hard shadows for both of them. So let's see what happens when we go to play mode. So the lighting of the spotlights doesn't seem to work. That's because we need to increase the intensity like so. You can also play with other parameters like the shape and also the range. So if I get out of play mode, I need to do that again. So let's just do that. Like so. Another element we can add in this environment is the mist. So I'm gonna right click and from visual effects, I'm gonna use the old school particle system and call it the mist, like so. And what I'm gonna do is to drag it right over here and turn it 90 degrees. I'm gonna set the shape to something different. Right over here, I'm gonna change it to a box, like so. And I'm also gonna increase the scale of this box. The idea is that you make it cover the area you wanna have the mist on. So next, instead of making the particles move this path like what you see, I'm gonna make him stay in position or at least have very little movement. I'm also gonna increase their size like so. So the next thing I'm gonna try to do is to make it look more like a mist. So I'm gonna come right over here on the renderer. I'm gonna create a material I can drop right over here. And the way I do it is I go to environment and you see this mist material. Let me delete that one. So the way to make that material is to right click, material, I'm gonna call it new mist. And I'm gonna change its shader to something more suitable for particles. Find this unlit shader. So it's universal render pipeline particles unlit. I'm gonna change the surface type to transparent and drag and drop the fog on the base map. So now I have a material ready for the mist. I'm gonna drag it right over here. So we still need to play around with the parameters a little bit. I'm gonna enable the 3D size, like so. There's one tiny problem here. The render mode needs to be something different, something other than the billboard. I'm gonna select the stretch billboard, and then I'm gonna work with the 3D size. So the scaling looks better now. And the next thing I'm gonna do is to enable the color over lifetime. And I'm gonna select the starting alpha value and bring it to 0. I'm gonna bring the end of it to 0 as well. And just in the middle, I'm gonna set it to something really subtle. And next, I'm gonna increase the lifetime from 5 seconds to 1 minute, duration to 1 minute as well. And I'm gonna set the emission to something less than 10, like so. You can always play around with the values. In fact, this is what you need to do, because you usually need to play around with the environment and every assets and the terrain and colors and everything. And one problem right over here is that we need to enable the pre-warm. Then I enter play mode. So yeah, you need to play around with all these values and try to get the look and feel you're really looking for in the environment. For example, that's still not really good enough, right? So what you need to do is to play around with other parameters. In fact, the ones we work with right now are things you need to focus on. So I'm gonna add one more element to this scene, and that is the pond. So once I add that, what remains to do is play around with these values, with the lighting, the colors, the terrain, until we get the desired environment. So let's try to create the pond. If you open up the Planar Reflection folder, this is what you need to get your pond right. So I'm gonna right click on the scene and create a plane. And I'll put it right over here. This seems like a good spot for it, although I'd rather increase the size a little bit. Rotate it like so. I'm also gonna allow the mesh collider to stay on the pond. So next, the way it works is that I add a component to it called Planar Reflection Camera. So this is the script you see right over here. So on this script, we're gonna need the main camera, which is what we have right over here. I'm gonna drag and drop it. Then we have a reflection camera, which is a duplicate of our main camera. I'm gonna rename it to mirrored camera. I'm also gonna make sure I remove the audio listener from it, and also the center machine brain. So I'm gonna drag and drop the mirrored camera on the reflection camera. We're gonna leave the reflection texture as it is, because this script just creates its own texture and you don't need an extra asset for it. The target renderer is the mesh renderer of the plane itself. I'm gonna drag and drop it like so. And one final thing is we need a pivot. So I'm gonna right click on the plane, create an empty game object, call it pivot, and drag and drop this pivot onto this point. In fact, this is the point where it determines where this whole mirroring is gonna happen. So if I play the game, you can see it better. So one thing we're missing here is that I need to drag and drop this material onto it as well. So this material has a reflection shader, which is a custom shader we have right over here. And I'm gonna press play. So you can see the character on the pond, and I'm also gonna move the car right over here. Let's press play again. So you can see our pond. It's a very interesting effect. And I'm gonna move this car down a little bit, pretty close to the surface, like so. So the way it works is that the planar reflection mirrors the position of the reflection camera based on this pivot transform and the main camera. Then it renders whatever this reflection camera sees onto a texture. You see it right over here. And then using this custom shader, we're gonna render the resulting texture onto the plane. So this is the effect you see right over here. And one final thing I showed you in the initial scene was that broken tree on the ground. I'm gonna also show you how that works. So if I go to environments and prefabs, I can drag and drop any of these trees I have right over here. And what I'm gonna do is to add a collider to it, like so. I'm gonna set it up properly. I'm gonna set it to trigger. Then I'm gonna add this script called stumble width. This is also another script we can see right over here, which you can download from my Patreon. And what this does is that it triggers the stumble animation on the character, and that's it. So whenever the character enters this trigger, it causes the character to fall, like so. So that's all the parameters you need to make an environment like that. And I'm gonna provide the existing scene, the one I spent like, I don't know, a full day to get it as it is. So that's all for this video. You can download all these assets and scenes from my Patreon. I'm gonna provide you the link in the description. I hope you found this video helpful, and I hope I'll see you in the next video.